We are living in difficult and trying times. I don't know if world was so chaotic in past or not, but it seems like that there is madness and craziness surrounding around. But still there are people of God, there are good people throughout the world who are doing good work. There are these small islands which give us hope, which tell us that our future is not as dismal as it looks. If we look at the faith traditions, God has created us in different tribes, and there are no three other tribes as close to each other as our children of Abraham. And our speaker tonight knows about all three traditions. No one can be as universalist as our speaker tonight is. He's an award-winning poet, he's an author, he's a movie maker.
Well, I am here this evening for an informal conversation and an informal address. I have a tie on, but that's because I have a microphone attached to it. I tried to take it off, but they wouldn't let me. And I'm here feeling a little careful about speaking tonight because I am in a town. I've been asked to talk about interfaith, I've been asked to talk about inclusivity, and I'm in a town where you have a major boulevard called Muhammad Ali. And the Dalai Lama seems to appear here every other week. You know, the level of inclusivity in Louisville is astonishing already. But I'd like to take a moment to, in the process of talking about this experience of difference, introduce myself a little bit, since many of you I do not know. Many of you do not know me. So who is this person? And how did he get to be a Muslim? And what, is he a Muslim? What? So I will go into that a little bit. As I told you, I was born and raised in Cincinnati. Went to college on the East Coast with actually a couple of people in this room are still old college buddies of mine. And I like to say that as far as becoming a Muslim, which I did in 1988 or thereabouts, was a kind of a process for me that probably took about 20 years of thinking about it before I actually made that move. After college, I lived and worked for a few years in some of those predominantly Muslim countries that I named. I had no religion of my own at that time, particularly, and I didn't feel I needed one. I didn't really come to that conclusion for another almost 20 years. And when I did, I was in my early 40s, and when I did need a religion, I already understood quite a bit about Islam because I had neighbors and friends and had lived in the milieu. I'd been in the swim of those communities. And I knew a few things. I knew that Muslims had a sacred book, rather like the Bible, for the Torah for Christians, or the Gospels for, or the Torah for Jews, or the Gospels for Christians. I knew that this book, I knew that Islam had about 750 million adherents at this time. It was a large community. There just were not very many in America. And when I looked further into it, beyond the dynamics and the sacred texts and the things that I could kind of immediately identify, I began to see that if I was going to be a Muslim, I wasn't going to need to give anything up. So for me to find out that Islam was inclusive of all of these people, Abraham and Moses and Jonah and Job and Noah, and that Jesus was a revered figure in Islam, and that Mary was mentioned more times in the Quran than Muhammad. and a bunch of other surprising things, to me very surprising things. When I saw how inclusive of my own past tradition this religion was, it was a much easier step for me, because there was nothing particularly exotic about it. There didn't seem to be anything about being an American and being a Muslim that was contradictory to me. I saw, for instance, also that Islam is a monotheistic religion. That Allah is an Arabic word for God. Arabic-speaking Christians speak of Allah. It's a word, no different. Islam, as I found it in the book and in the mosque that I began to look into very tentatively in my home state at that time in California, was very inclusive by nature and by scripture and by practice. To the point that sometimes when I read the Quran in an English translation, it sounded very like the Bible to me. I don't need to tell anyone sitting here right now that when you have no exposure to a people or a faith, that it's very hard to know much about it. In the same way, you know very well that if a person is only told one or two things about a religion or a people, then that is what that person knows until they meet an actual representative who can tell them more or show them more. And this is as true of Muslims about Christianity as it is of Christians about Islam. So 4 or 5 days after 9/11, I was sitting in a Pakistani restaurant in California with a bunch of young Muslims from Pakistani and Indian and various descents. And they said to me, what can we do? What can we do to show our neighbors that we're here and we're alive and we're okay and we're part of their community? And I didn't know, but we talked it over, and eventually we decided. One of them had a neighbor who was Catholic, and we wound up going to an old California mission on Sunday. And I wound up kind of being the shepherd because these guys had never been anywhere near a Catholic church before. They weren't sure what was going on. We all sat in the pews, and we respectfully listened to a beautiful sermon, the end of which I still remember, an Irishman who said it is our job as Christians and human beings to reach into evil and pull out something good. And these Muslims who were with me were delightfully stunned, I would say, really surprised. Rather like a lot of the Jews and Christians who came to the mosques after 9/11. There was a flood of Americans who came into the mosque for the first times in their lives after 9/11. I'll give you an example. With Islam, with Muslims, charity is like a very central piece of the religion. It's a very central piece of the practice. And there's certain months, like the month of fasting, when you're not eating, when you're also being extremely charitable, giving a lot away, and you're thinking about other people. And you're not just giving away materially, but you're taking on and thinking about people who have less, who are in more pain. There's a lot of charity in Islam. It's a very central piece of the project. And it's completely possible to miss this. Entirely possible to miss this if you haven't talked to somebody who kind of lives as a Muslim, which is really easy to do in this country. So I said earlier that I make films. I want to show you a clip from a film. It's a little kind of slice of life segment. This is a kind of a slice of life segment. It's very short, and it takes us to a soup kitchen in Detroit, served in this instance by a group of young Muslims and a mom who drives them there. And you hear the mom's voice in voiceover talking about what they're doing. It's a Saturday, and a handful of kids, and they're going off to this soup kitchen in a very difficult part of Detroit. This is a story, a simple story, but it's telling a pretty complex reality. And the reality goes kind of like this. First, there's a man who's studying to be a deacon in a Catholic church, and he tells us that he has visited the imam, the African-American Abdullah, that Abdullah has come and visited the church. Excuse me. He tells us that Abdullah has come and visited the church and talked about the charitable aspect of Islam. And the deacon had never heard of this before. Now, this is a man about to become a man of the cloth and a man who's interested in religion but had no notion of this, and he says so. I had no idea that that fellowship and charity was even a part of your faith, he says. So he is curious, and so he wants to see more. That's why he is in the picture. So he visits the soup kitchen to see more, and then this is where we come in. Camera is there, the deacon tells the story to, it turns out, the mother who's brought the kids on Saturday. So this is an example of a story that reverses a misconception or a preconception, or in this case, no conception. You know, a little knowledge is a dangerous thing, and no knowledge is a vacuum. And into a vacuum, anything can come. So the deacon doesn't know before he meets Abdullah that charity is central to Islam. An opinion has formed in the place of knowledge. This is what happens to all of us when we don't know. An opinion forms in the absence of information. And then we have a little knowledge, and a little knowledge, as we know, is a dangerous thing. And in this case, it creates a negative opinion in his mind. It creates something that is unintentionally demeaning, an opinion that distances people and makes them suspicious of each other. So Abdullah, with his invitation, and here we're back to this notion that I began with this evening, of crossing the street to a stranger, of in the room where there are many Japanese and one Apache, or whatever the arrangement you think it might be, you make an effort. Abdullah made that effort to let others know who he is. And the deacon was curious enough of what he represented to follow up and learn more. And it's that connection that we really have to look for in our communities. Because without that, our communities can wither. Our communities can only become suspicious. So it's that kind of chemistry that we have to look for, we have to try to make. And since the camera was there, then we all can share in this particular story as well. I have here some words that I want to read you, and they are a short song by Jack Temkin. So he's not a Muslim or probably a Christian. He's an accomplished rock and roll songwriter, many years. He wrote Peaceful Easy Feeling, you may remember that song, many other hits over the years. And this song is called Jesus and Muhammad. And he just wrote it quite recently. Jesus and Muhammad sitting underneath a tree. Muhammad said, "They're fighting over you and me." Jesus said, "There are armies marching through sacred lands, brother fighting brother for a patch of sand." "This isn't what we wanted," both of them did say. "How did all our words of love bring us to this day?" They sat a while in silence, in the fading light. Muhammad said, "A million souls pray for peace tonight." Still, the fight continues. We've done all we can do. Don't they see there is no war between me and you? Thank you very much.